Let's go, Molly.
Kingdom Hearts is one of the most influential and weirdest games ever. On one hand, you're fighting with Donald Duck and Goofy to destroy the embodiment of evil. But on the other hand, you have a really well balanced, a really interesting, and a really fun RPG that introduced a lot of concepts that are still used to this day. Stuff like aerial combos and party members with specialized roles. But how did a game that started as an easy collab between Square and Disney become one of the most renowned and loved action RPG franchises of all time? Or let me put it like this, what makes Kingdom Hearts special? Well, let's talk about it. With series like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, and Nioh being everywhere, really a dime a dozen, it's easy to forget that the hack and slash genre pretty much started with Kingdom Hearts. And I'm not saying that Kingdom Hearts is the first 3D action RPG, it's not.
This is it!
But most, if not all, the action RPGs in the 5th generation of consoles, the PS1, N64, they really put a lot more focus on the action part. There was little to no customizability, really no RPG elements to be found. So while some people might think Kingdom Hearts drew a lot of inspiration from games like Legacy of Kain and Tenchu, in my opinion, it's more similar to something like Symphony of the Night. A game with an open worldish design, a lot of options to choose for in combat, and different enemies that require different strategies. But okay, for those who aren't familiar, Kingdom Hearts is an action RPG, so it has a lot of the RPG staples, but it also has a lot of unique things as well. The first of these is AP. AP is action points, and it determines how many abilities you can equip at the same time. I'm going to go more into depth on abilities later, so for now just know that action points are limited, and while there are items to boost it, they're hard to come by. There's also a few basic attributes, those being strength, defense, and magic. Strength determines how hard you hit, defense determines how much damage you take, and magic determines the strength of your magic. But before I really start talking about gameplay, let's set the stage and talk briefly about the story. Sora is the main character. He's a young kid from an island village who dreams of traveling on the sea. He wields a powerful weapon called a Keyblade, and he uses keychains to change its appearance and increase its strength. He fights alongside Donald, Goofy, and other Disney characters to defeat monsters called the Heartless, which are born from the evil in people's hearts and have no emotions of their own. They come in a crazy amount of forms. They can take the appearance of animals, objects, even people. And as far as Kingdom Hearts 1 goes, that's all you really need to know about the story. I think a big part of what makes Kingdom Hearts fun is the movement. Sora is just fun to control, and it's nowhere near the level of something like Super Mario, I know, but that's not the point. Sora isn't a master acrobat flipping and flying all over the place. At least not yet. Like, he's just an island kid, and it shows. At the beginning of the game, you run slow and you jump low, but as you progress as a character, you also increase in strength as a player, and I think this is something more games need to take note of. A lot of games have you start as a beginner or a rookie, but your skills don't really reflect that. You're already pretty proficient in the weapons you use. I think it'd be a lot more interesting if you started powerless in a lot of games, like you do here, and work your way up to that mastery. But I'm getting off track. Those abilities that you gain not only help you explore new areas, but they also help you explore old areas in a new way. So let's talk about these abilities specifically. You have high jump, glide, and super glide. High jump is always obtained first, and it's just a boost to your jump height. And that might seem boring and not worth talking about, but being in the air is everything in Kingdom Hearts. Not only does being in the air allow you to do air combos, which are quicker than ground combos and just as strong. Doing air combos also lets you hit ground enemies, and they can't hit you back, so it's a good option. But outside of combat, high jump will obviously let you reach higher places that you couldn't reach before, and there's a lot of them. And I can imagine some of you saying, well, pretty much every adventure game that has a focus on platforming gives you a boost to your jump height. This is nothing special. Well, let me introduce you to something that is special, glide. And look, Kingdom Hearts isn't the only game or the first game to have a gliding ability, but this is just different. I don't know, there's just something about it. It's weightier, you have more control, something like that. It just doesn't feel like other games. I haven't seen this in any other series except Kingdom Hearts. But if you can't tell by the gameplay, glide pretty much allows you to float through the air. It's not really flight because you can't control your vertical height, but you can completely control your horizontal movement. Glide's application while you're exploring the world should be pretty obvious. You can get to places you couldn't get to before, even by jumping. It really feels like it unlocks another dimension to the game, like your movement was really incomplete before you got it. But even more than that, it's unbelievably useful in combat, and you wouldn't think so. You're really vulnerable while you're gliding. Air enemies can hit you easily. Kingdom Hearts 1 is all about positioning, unlike the later games where there's a lot of moments where the control is taken away from you, even if it's just for a couple seconds. That almost doesn't happen at all here. Like, for example, in Kingdom Hearts 2, every time you finish a combo, the control is completely taken away from you. You just watch your character do a big flashy move, and it's hard for enemies to hit you out of it. But in Kingdom Hearts 1, there aren't a lot of flashy invincible moves outside of the limits, which we'll talk about. So you have to make proper use of your movement abilities to position yourself during fights, to be able to hit enemies with your strongest combos. I think the developers might have realized this, and that's why in Kingdom Hearts 1, movement abilities are tied to story progression, meaning by the end of the game's story, you'll have every ability. But in Kingdom Hearts 2, you can beat the entire game pretty much and not unlock one.
Come on!
But anyway, Glide is the perfect tool to reposition yourself. It easily allows you to get around and away from enemies so you can use your spells, items, or just attack. And Super Glide is just an extension of this. It's just Glide, but you fly faster. But Super Glide doesn't make Glide completely useless. I still found a few uses for it. Like sometimes you don't need to completely escape an enemy, you just need to get out of their line of fire so you can use your own spells on them. And Glide is perfect for this. I think this is something a lot of games can learn from. Just because you get a new ability, it doesn't mean it shouldn't invalidate your older ones. But okay, I think you all get the point now. Movement in Kingdom Hearts is fun and varied, and getting new abilities makes you feel like you're really getting stronger, and it really helps you feel the progression of the game. Let's talk about attacking now, more specifically physical attacks and combos. Soar starts with a pretty basic 3-hit combo, 2 weak attacks and a relatively strong finisher. Throughout the game, Soar gets an incredible amount of moves that support his combat. Some of them are situation specific, like counterattack, which gives you MP after parrying an enemy attack. Or it could be something more general, like Combo Plus or Air Combo Plus, which add another hit to your basic 3-hit combo. And Kingdom Hearts 1, way more than any other Kingdom Hearts game, your AP, the ability points which allow you to equip all your abilities, is very limited. It's so limited in fact that unless you're willing to grind for hours to make AP boost, you can only equip one limit and a couple of combat abilities at a time.
Come on!
Since you have to balance support abilities and other abilities as well. But getting back on topic, I think I want to address something I've seen pretty commonly when talking about Kingdom Hearts. And that is, it's a button mashing, press X to win type of game. Kingdom Hearts is only a button masher if you want it to be. No bosses can be beat like that, in pretty much any of the games. Mob fights can also be close to impossible if you just mindlessly attack, instead of using magic, limits, and summons when the situation calls for it. Of all the games in the hack and slash genre, Kingdom Hearts is among the deepest and most strategic. I can't sit here and say it's perfect or it doesn't have its button mash moments, but it's a lot more diverse than a lot of people say it is. But since we're talking about combat, magic is the other half of Kingdom Hearts' combat. The game has 7 spells in total, 4 offensive and 3 defensive. The 4 offensive are Fire, Blizzard, Gravity, and Thunder. Fire and Blizzard pretty much function the same way, it's just a single shot of the element that homes onto the enemy, but Fire is usually the better option. Gravity is one of the strongest spells in the whole series. It tracks the enemy no matter where they go and takes off a large percentage of their health. Thunder is a pretty reliable spell. It doesn't have the immense damage of Gravity, but it has the tracking and takes a lot less MP. The 3 defensive spells are Cure, Arrow, and Stop. Cure is pretty unique in this game because it can be spammed as long as you have the MP to use it, whereas in other games, one use of it will drain your entire MP bar no matter how full it is. Arrow is a wind force field you summon around yourself. Not only does it reduce the damage you take, but it also damages enemies that are close to you, making it one of the most versatile spells in the whole game. Stop is pretty powerful too, but it doesn't work on bosses really at all. Like the name says, it stops enemies completely for a period of time, allowing you to hit them freely without them being able to hit you back. Normal enemies are stopped for 4 to 5 seconds, while bosses are stopped for a second or two, if at all. Magic spells take a backseat in this game, despite being very strong. This was their first outing, so I can't blame them for this too bad, but using magic for the most part puts you in a bad spot. All of the spells require you to stand still and wait for them to cast, and the enemies can still hit you. This means in most boss fights, where you're constantly chased down and hit with stun lock combos, or you're hit with big area of effect attacks constantly, it's hard to find a place to stop and wait a few seconds to get a spell off, even if you have it mapped to quick select. I think the developers might have realized this. See, in this game, magic has 3 tiers, and if you know about Final Fantasy, this is going to sound familiar to you. Magic has the base tier, the second tier, where the spell ends in the letter A, like Fyra or Cura, and the third tier, where the spell ends in Aga, like Firaga or Curaga. While the first and second forms of most spells are unlocked by playing normally through the story, the third forms for almost all the spells are locked through side content. The game actively forces you to go out of your way to get stronger spells, instead of making it easily available like in later games. But even though I say all this negative stuff about magic, don't think it's weak by any means or it's not fun to use. Magic is one of the strongest elements in this game. It's horribly unbalanced, and a lot of enemies can be destroyed if you have enough MP to continually cast spells. So instead of getting a lot of boost to your magic as you progress throughout the game, you're given different abilities depending on which class you pick. I say class, but maybe that isn't the right word. You're not really locked out of any abilities, your class just determines when you get the ability. But let me back up. Towards the beginning of the game, you're tasked with picking a weapon and giving one up. This is the same as picking a class or character in most games, as Sora will play completely different, especially in the early game depending on which option you pick. Not only do these options affect your starting stats, your AP and how many items you can carry, but it also affects which level you'll get your abilities. The 3 options are sword, shield, and staff, and they symbolize attack, defense, and magic. In my opinion, picking the shield and dropping the sword is the best option because you get the most AP and the most item slots, but the choice is up to you, there's really no wrong one. So as you level up and gain new abilities, you get access to a wide variety of options that support your combat and movement, which I like to call support abilities. There are a crazy number of them, so many in fact that just naming them will be a huge task. So I'm only going to talk about the ones I think are most important, and those are Dodge Roll, Guard, Scan, MP Haste, MP Rage, Second Chance, and Leaf Bracer. Dodge Roll and Guard are your 2 main defensive options, and with that being the case, I'm surprised how late in the game you can get Guard if you pick a certain build. Dodge Roll is what it sounds like, it's pretty much a somersault that allows you to evade enemies. This is one of the worst defensive options in any hack and slash game on purpose, as you're easily hit out of it and you can't really attack out of it. I mean, it serves its purpose, but I would much rather start out with Guard like you do in the rest of the games. Speaking of Guard, it's your number 1 defense option, and it's really effective. Guard is exactly what it sounds like. You use your Keyblade and you block attacks. Blocking certain enemy attacks staggers them and leaves them open to be hit. For all of the final bosses and some of the super bosses, it's essential to know how and when to block. You pretty much can't win without it. Scan is the simplest ability without a doubt. It just allows you to see enemy HP. In most games this wouldn't be an ability, it's just something you start with, but here, it's something you might unlock as late as level 20, after you've already beat 2 or 3 worlds. Knowing an enemy's HP in this game is extremely important, because when bosses reach a certain amount of health, they start doing DMs or desperation moves, and I'll talk about that when I talk about boss design. MP Haste recovers your magic when you hit enemies, and MP Rage recovers your magic when you get hit, so if you're staying on the offensive, it shouldn't be hard to keep your MP up. Second Chance is absolutely one of the most useful abilities in the game, allowing you to stay alive after taking a fatal hit. Leaf Bracer prevents you from being interrupted when you heal, which is incredibly useful, and when it's combined with Second Chance, it's the only thing that'll keep you alive during those tough boss fights. And this is really just a small portion of the abilities in the game. The developers really tried to account for every situation in which you can get some kind of boost. The only really annoying thing I see is the lack of AP, but honestly, I'm starting to think this is more of a me problem. The support abilities are really varied and can allow you to change your whole playstyle. Let's talk about Sora's special combat abilities, called limits. The 5 limits are Sonic Blade, Ars Arcanum, Strike Raid, Ragnarok, and Trinity Limit. Sonic Blade has you slashing past enemies unable to take damage. The attack is pretty strong, but it can be hard to hit some bosses with, especially the late super bosses. But you usually get it early in the game, and it's pretty useful in mob fights. Strike Raid is by far the strongest, and it's my favorite. Strike Raid has you throwing your Keyblade at enemies, making it the only true long-range option that isn't magic. Like the rest of the limits, it makes you invincible, it can't be interrupted, and it has the greatest tracking of any attack. Ragnarok is an aerial limit that has you do a big combo in the air then shoot out a big ball of energy. It's by far my least used, and it isn't useless, it's just I found more uses for some of the others. Trinity Limit is the strongest of the limits, but it doesn't have as many uses as the other ones. Sora, Donald, and Goofy team up for a big attack that clears rooms, but it takes all your MP, and you need MP to heal yourself, do other types of magic, and use summons. But if you do use up all your MP or you get low on HP, then items might be a reliable option. There's 3 items, each with multiple tiers. There's Potion, Ether, and Elixir. Potions restore your HP, High Potions restore more of it, and Mega Potions restore the same amount as High, but they heal Donald and Goofy too. Ethers restore your MP, and Mega Ethers restore your teammates' MP too. Elixirs are the most useful item, by far. They fully restore your MP and your HP. And Mega Elixirs are the strongest items in the game. They restore yours and your teammates' MP and HP fully. The strongest tier of items aren't in the shop, and they require a good amount of materials to make with synthesis, so it's best not to over-rely on them. Ethers are probably the most reliable item. They're cheap to buy in the shop, and you can heal yourself using Cure once you restore your MP. They also still restore a good amount of MP even towards the end game. Summons are the third piece of the magic trifecta in Kingdom Hearts 1, along with limits and base magic. Summons allow you to summon allies from Disney worlds to fight alongside you. In my opinion, this game and KH3 are tied with having the strongest summons in the series. Kingdom Hearts has 6 summons though, 2 being defensive and 4 being offensive. Tinkerbell and Bambi are the 2 defensive. Tinkerbell heals you periodically, and Bambi drops items when you kill enemies. These abilities honestly are massively overpowered depending on the situation, with Bambi helping tremendously during the synthesis grind, and Tinkerbell helping in late game boss fights, keeping you in the fight, and basically providing a free source of healing. Dumbo, Mushu, and Genie all specialize in long range attacks. Dumbo flies around while shooting water, which does continual magic damage, and you're invincible while you're on him. Taking damage just makes the summon meter go down faster. Mushu is like a mortar, and he fires continuous fireballs at the enemies. He's not as strong as Dumbo, so I didn't get much use out of him. Genie is pretty versatile. He uses a variety of magic spells and fires them at enemies, but again, not as strong as Dumbo, at least in my opinion. Finally, we have Simba. Simba's probably the strongest summon if you set everything up right. If you equip every ability and accessory that makes your summon stronger, he can take out entire enemy health bars in one roar. But if you don't do that, and you probably won't, then he's pitifully weak and close to useless. But this is part 1 of my Kingdom Hearts retrospective. I just wanted to kind of gauge the interest, see what everybody's thinking about. So leave a like and subscribe if you really enjoyed the video. Make sure to comment, tell me if you want part 2. And if this gets enough support, I'll definitely come out with it soon. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch y'all later.